For those of you that don't know me, I'm CEO of the KPMG Islands Group, of which Malta is one of our premier practices. But that's not why I'm standing in front of you today. I'm standing in front of you today because I was going to describe myself as the founder of our e-gaming summit series, but Peter Murray described it much better this morning in his tweet, because he called me the matriarch of the KPMG Summit family, and I like that. So I'm going to go with that. But the good news from your point of view is that as the matriarch of that family, I know what my responsibility is now, which is to be bloody quick, because we are already running well over time, and I'm the only thing that stands between you and a drink. So all I plan to do is take a very quick look, and those of you that understand what PechaKucha is, it's 20 seconds per slide, so you can time me and see whether I manage it. But I'm going to look back at how, why, and when we started the summits. I'm going to take a quick run through some of the polls that we've done on different key topics over recent years, and I'm just going to finish with a very brief look to what the future might hold for us. So in terms of when we started and why we started, when I look back to 2010, there were three main drivers. One was that across the three jurisdictions where we now have summits, Malta, Gibraltar, and the Isle of Man, we had looked at the gaming and betting sector, and we had seen it as key to the economic success of our jurisdictions. The second was that our competitors were, in the main, at best, ambivalent about this sector and about supporting it. And the third, particularly in the Isle of Man, but I know that this is something that has affected the other jurisdictions since, the banking sector did not understand or wish to support the sector. And so a big driver of why we started the summits was to educate the banks about how well-regulated, self-regulated and externally regulated this sector was. But also, frankly, as a public signal that we, as a Big Four firm, supported and wanted to support the sector. So if I look back to how the summit has grown over those years, we started with the Isle of Man in 2010 with 120 participants, added Gibraltar just the following year, and then Malta had their first summit 3 years ago in 2016, and today we have 308 participants here. So you can see that it's a journey that's traveled well. And not only that, typically about half of our delegates now come from outside the jurisdiction in which we're holding the event. And of course, the whole point of this was to tell people about what it was we were doing. And so we tweet, we publish, we talk, we report after every event about what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it, and what all of our speakers have said. And a really important part of those reports are these. The summit reports that Continent 8 have sponsored right since we started this summit series, and we're extraordinarily grateful to them. Not least because it allows us to reach a much larger audience than just the people who attend the events. And that was brought home to me very clearly during the summer, because actually I attended the cricket with a group of people from GVC. And Rob Wood, who just very recently, you will have seen in the news, became their new CFO, said to me, well, I actually gently teased him about the fact that he had never been to one of our summits, and when was he going to come to one? And he said, can I be frank with you, Micky? I'm never going to come to one of your summits, because I don't have time to travel to Malta or Gibraltar or the Isle of Man. So unless you decide to hold a summit here in London, I'm not going to come to one. But I read your summit reports every time they arrive, and I send them on to my entire team, and we all read them and we all learn from them, and I'm very grateful for them. So that's the power of the summit reports, and that's why we put so much effort and expense into doing them, expense that is much supported by Continent 8. I didn't quite manage 20 seconds on that one, did I? And the polls that we've run, different speakers have had the option to run polls over the years, and I just thought it'd be useful to briefly revisit a couple of them. So we'd look at some of the ones on M&A, which Simon French spoke to us so well about this morning. So back in 2016, when we asked about the main drivers of M&A, the clear lead, and Simon talked this morning about how scale is showing to be the winner, was market dominance. Just a year later, when we asked the same question, sorry, I'll come back to that, I'm getting ahead of myself. At the same time, we asked about the main causes of M&A failure, and as someone whose background was in people and change, and Malcolm Pache de Bono will support me on this, to see the acknowledgement that a key reason why mergers and acquisitions do not drive the value that they should have done is not taking into account the need for synergy on culture and to tackle cultural differences where they lie. So it was great to see that our audience of operators, mainly operators, recognise that. And we looked at the drivers of M&A again just a year later, and whilst competitive scale was still considered a very important factor, new game technology, so the customer experience that we were hearing about earlier today, was starting to be seen as a real factor. So the summits give us a really useful chance to see how the thinking of the operators and the people that provide services to the operators is changing over the years. When we looked at the future for M&A last year, and this was before anybody knew what was coming with PASPA, we saw it broadly as an even mix between large deals and the smaller niche deals. The other area that we often survey our audiences on, and which is close to their heart, is regulation. And I thought I'd share a couple of the polls from 2017, talking about how much regulatory trouble is the industry really in. And a lot of this was said with a view towards the actions of the UK Gambling Commission. What factors would bring better governance most effectively to the industry, and then finally how good we were in the remote sector, particularly at protecting our customers from gambling related harm. And you'll see that there was a strong feeling that we should be doing more. And I was at the Remote Gambling Association AGM in London yesterday lunchtime before heading over here to Malta last night, and they were talking there about how they feel the regulatory pendulum is starting to swing back. It was notable at the Raising Standards meeting of the UK Gambling Commission earlier this month that Neil MacArthur's language was very different to Sarah Harrison's language in the last couple of years. No longer any talk of the industry needing to change and pushing the boundaries too far for the regulators' liking. Instead, he talked about collaboration, and he even acknowledged that gambling is a source of fun for most of its punters. And that's something that a regulator hasn't said for a while. In fact, no one has said publicly for a while in the UK. And when we looked at regulation just a couple of months ago at the Isle of Man summit in September, and asked about whether the UK Gambling Commission's enforcement activity was too much, too little, or about right, you can see that an awful lot of people in the room were kind of on their side. When we looked at financial settlements on reviews, and when you've seen the size of some of the financial settlements, you might be surprised at the percentage of people in the room that said that yes, they were proportionate. And when we talked about whether the actions of the UK GC were leading to raised standards, then again there was a feeling that yes, they were across the board. And the final question on that, though, was whether the industry would have raised standard itself. And one of the things that we've really been calling upon at our KPMG meetings, particularly in the UK, is for the industry to speak with one voice in these areas and to really pull together. The other area, which those of you who know me will know is very close to my heart, I lead the We All Want to Play diversity initiative that KPMG runs for the gambling and betting sector. And I speak often. I'm speaking next week back in London at the Gamble Aware conference on diversity in business. And so we often poll our audiences on this question of looking at the percentage first of the executive team that are female. And some of you that know KPMG well will know that we were one of the founder members of the 30% Club, which particularly aimed for FTSE 100 companies to aim to have at least 30% participation by women in their executive teams and on their boards. And the reason for that is that the research shows that it's only when women's participation in a board grouping reaches that level that they start to have a meaningful voice and a meaningful contribution to the debate. So you'll see that only 3%, when we surveyed in Gibraltar in 2017, only 3% of the operators had achieved that threshold. And when we surveyed again in the Isle of Man just 6 months later, it was more like 6%, but obviously talking about different operators there. But when it comes to diversity, we don't just talk about talent and participation by women at board level. We also talk about the customer base, because when you look outside bingo, of course, when you look at the tone and the nature of the advertising of many of the gaming operators, it certainly leaves one strongly with the impression that they like having a customer base that is only about half the size that it could be. The other area I often talk about is, in light of the business case for diversity, why are we not seeing more change in this area? And I talk about three main causes. The first being business leaders who don't recognise the business case for diversity, or in the words of the Hampton-Alexander report, who published all of those fabulous reasons that chairmen gave for having no women directors on their board. They talked about business leaders who just don't get it. So that's the first. The second is bias, unconscious bias. When I present on this topic, I have a section of my presentation that's called "We're All a Little Bit Sexist." And then finally, workplace culture. And that was the topic on which we asked the question in the Isle of Man in 2017, about whether people believed that the gaming operators' workplace cultures were inhibited opportunities for women. And actually that response, with 33%, just a third of operators saying that no, they didn't, holds up extremely well against other sectors. And I think it's actually a pretty positive sign for the industry. And then the final topic is a very topical one, isn't it? Brexit. And of course, this is a question that we ask in Gibraltar, who have had a particularly tough time when it comes to Brexit. And you'll see that when we asked about the most important factors for Gibraltar operators back in 2017, then the free movement of people across the frontier was absolutely paramount. 53% of the audience voted for that. And as someone who was a managing director of our Gibraltar practice for a couple of years, during a summer actually in 2013 when the border was terrible, I can certainly understand why people felt so strongly. And we asked the same question in April this year, and it was interesting to see that whilst exactly the same percentage of the audience was still focused on the border, there was a large and growing percentage of people that were focused on EU freedom of services. And I think we can only imagine what they would be saying if we were surveying them today. So just to finish, the future, and reflecting on what the future holds for KPMG and the KPMG Summit series. And frankly, I would say it's more of the same. The reasons that we started the Summit series haven't gone away. There were some rueful nods around the room when I talked about the difficulty of getting banking services. And certainly in our mind as a Big Four firm, there is no doubt that the sector continues to need long-standing, reliable, loyal friends. So we see the Summit series continuing, and I have to say that when I look at the KPMG Global Gaming team, of which I am part, and there are representatives of that team from several countries in the room today, the US are here, the UK are here, Sweden, and I think it's been really gratifying to see the bonds and the relationships that have grown between that team over the years. And we think that's our USP. We think particularly when it comes to M&A and cross-border M&A, we are in an unparalleled position to support the industry. And our understanding and our long service to the industry, I think, stands us in very good stead. So Russell mentioned at the beginning of the day that this is in fact the 20th event that we've had in the Summit series, and I think it has been a really worthy holder of that title. Fantastic range of speakers from old friends to new faces, and a great spread of topics. So I hope you will join me in showing my colleagues and my friends, Russell, Alice and Mark, our appreciation. And with that, I look forward to seeing you all in the bar. Thank you. Very noisy shoot.
Thank you to everyone for coming along today. Thank you to our sponsors and our partners, and thank you to all of those who donated generously to our fundraising initiative for ALS Malta. We're still encouraging donations, so if you'd like to donate, please get in touch with Russell or myself or Mark, and we'll be able to give you instructions on how to do that. If anyone has a parking ticket that they need validated, we're handing out vouchers downstairs. And we will be all going now to the quarter deck bar for some drinks, so do feel free to join us. Thank you.